This is ABTV, Animal Bites Television.
Take a look. I hatched something that was so cool that I've really been wanting to hatch for several years now. To start with, these are really neat too. These are actually a banana chocolate pinstripe, and the chocolate and the banana are cool mutations, but the real animal that I was just blown away by, and believe it or not, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first one ever to be produced. That's right, this one right here is the only one out there, and it's a banana super chocolate ball python. Take a look at how amazing that animal is. And I'll be honest with you guys, I'm so excited about this animal, and I was so pumped to actually produce it, that even if I was offered $25,000 for this snake, I wouldn't sell it, because that's how much I like it. I really don't have an idea what it would sell for, but my point is that I wouldn't sell it even for $25,000. And speaking of that money, this whole episode is going to be talking about the most expensive snakes ever in the reptile hobby. So there's going to be some really fun stuff going on. I hope you guys will enjoy it. Let me start by saying that I never really want to put like a dollar amount on a snake, in the sense that I want anyone to believe that anyone should be working with animals just for the money. But one of the things I always talk about is that if you're working hard to make money off of something you love is totally fine, as long as you don't put the money in front of the animal itself, right? So basically, if there's a decision that needs to be made, you can't make it financially based. And I always say here that I want my cheapest snake to be cared for the same as my most expensive snake. But that being said, let's get into the beef of the show, which is the value of some of these snakes. Take for instance this albino ball python. This was one of the early comers of the ball python world, which was really one of the most expensive snakes in the reptile hobby ever, which was the ball python, of course. Now, the first albinos were actually produced by Bob Clark way back in the 90s, and the babies were selling for $15,000 a piece. That's right, $15,000 for a snake just like this. And guess what? I was one of the recipients of that. I ponied up 15 grand to get my first albino ball python. And to be honest, it was worth every penny of it. They're amazing animals. But this was in the very beginning of the ball python game, and the albinos certainly were one of the animals that set the precedent for this investment quality snake. Next up literally was the pied ball python, and Peter Call from Pete Call Reptiles is the one that proved him genetic. This really exploded the interest in snakes, because as you can see, piebald ball pythons are amazing animals, and they're extremely variable with that pitch white and that beautiful pattern, not to mention the mutations you can produce from them, really piqued people's interest. And the first piebald ball python babies were selling for $25,000. That is a huge amount of money. And let me tell you what, there were people standing in line to buy them. That's how popular they became. And that's what really opened the floodgates when it came to ball pythons and investment quality snakes. As the ball python world was kind of exploding, I was a player in that world, so I made some really good contacts over in West Africa, and that was in Ghana, Togo, and Benin. That's where they're being exported out of, and we were able to bring in one of the big animals of that era, and of course that was the pinstripe ball python. Now, I bought it out of a place called Abomey, Benin for $27,000, and yep, that's what it looked like right here. Now, when we bought it, we had no idea what the genetic nature was going to be. You got to remember, there was only a handful of mutation ball pythons at the time. Really, basically, you had ghost ball pythons, albino ball pythons, and piebalds, and that was basically it. So when we got the pinstripe, we were really rolling the dice, and $27,000 was a huge amount of money. But fortunately, 18 months later, that male pinstripe bred some normal females, and to our amazement, half of the babies came out looking like a pinstripe. Now, that was a home run for my company for sure, and we were selling babies for $25,000. That's right, people were paying 25 grand for a pinstripe, and I gotta be honest with you guys, when I ran out of them, people were upset at me and mad that I didn't have more. They were pissed off that I wouldn't take their $25,000. That was the fever pitch of what ball pythons had started to do. That same year that I produced the pinstripe ball pythons, Kevin McCurley over at Nerd produce spider ball pythons, which are relatively similar, certainly in the genetic makeup of them, but also in the fact that they had this reduced pattern. And again, when you bred them out, half the babies on average came out spiders. Again, Kevin was selling spiders for $25,000 a piece. So you can start to see, now we've got albinos for big bucks, pied for big bucks, spiders, and pinstripes. The market was really starting to explode, and trust me, this was only the beginning of a long run with ball pythons. Now the floodgates were really opening up, so animals were coming out of West Africa at a fever pitch, and people just wanted to invest in anything slightly unusual. I'm going to be honest with you, about half, no, I'll take that back. About 3/4 of the mutations that we brought out of West Africa turned out to not be genetic. So you were really rolling the dice. And we're talking big money now. No longer were the days of investing $100 and proving something out big time. Every just slightly different animal like this cinnamon pastel, we're selling for $15,000 and $20,000 out of Africa. And sure enough, the cinnamon pastels did sell for $15,000, but were proven out by Greg Graziani and then shortly after by me, a different bloodline. And again, people were standing in line to pay 15 grand. That market was absolutely crazy. And again, every time you had something that did prove out, you had people just standing in line throwing money at you because they wanted to get in the game. And the only way to get in the game was to spend the big bucks on that next mutation that might be something cool. And I tell you what, even something as mildly interesting as a yellow-bellied ball python right here. And again, it almost looks like a normal ball python, but has a really interesting pattern right here, like right down the belly here. And of course, the belly is a little bit yellow. And these yellow-bellied ball pythons were selling for $15,000. That's right, an animal that almost looked normal, that certainly for years had been getting brought into the country for $5 or $10. All of a sudden, we're getting $15,000 for this animal. But let me tell you what happens when you start breeding these together. I'll show you the super cinnamon really quick. When you breed cinnamon to cinnamon, this is what you get. And that's why that animal was so interesting to people, is they thought, oh my God, you can get basically a solid black snake. And actually, Chris McQuaid down in Florida was the first one to breed actually black pastel to black pastel, which is really similar to cinnamons, and produce the solid black ball python. And I remember seeing that one at the Orlando Expo once, and I was just absolutely blown away, just seeing that we went from just a couple mutations to start to see these incredible combinations like this in such a short period of time. He sold that first cinnamon or super black pastel, I believe, for $45,000. You start to see the elevation. And hey, you think 45 grand's a lot? Let me show you what happens when you breed yellow-belly to yellow-belly. And that animal is right here. Again, this is a yellow-bellied ball python bred to a yellow-bellied ball python, and it produced an all-white snake, which they call an ivory ball python. It's not quite the black-eyed Lucy that was eventually produced by Fire to Fire, or the blue-eyed Lucy that was produced by Lesser, Mojave Lesser, Phantom, and all that other stuff. But regardless, this was the first white snake that was sold. Peter Call sold it to Chad Brown from Pro Exotics for $125,000. That's right, 125 grand this animal was sold. Not this animal, but an animal just like it was sold for. That, to date, was the most expensive snake that was ever sold in the reptile history, which was pretty amazing. But again, that started to set even more of a precedent to more expensive snakes. So when new mutations started to come out, people started to charge even more and more for them. Example, back about 10 or 12 years ago, Will Slough in Illinois produced the first banana ball python. Now, what was interesting about that animal is it came in as a weird-looking caramel albino and was down at a wholesaler in Florida named Strictly Reptiles, and people were trying to sell it for like 15, 20 grand, and nobody was interested, because at the time, caramels were selling for like 15 grand, and everyone's like, well, why would I want to buy an import that's just slightly different looking for even more money? So Will stepped up to the table, and he actually paid the $20,000 for the animal, later producing bananas because it was a co-dominant mutation. So everyone was thinking caramel recessive, and bam, he outpops half babies looking just like this. At the same exact time, Kevin McCurley over at Nerd produced what he called coral glows, and are still calling coral glows, which are basically exactly like bananas, just came from two completely different bloodlines. And now most people don't even distinguish between coral and banana because they're basically the exact same animal. Regardless, both Kevin and Will were selling babies for $65,000. That's right, $65,000 for baby banana ball pythons. That was incredible, because this was the first time that a single gene animal actually eclipsed that $50,000 price range. Enter the scaleless head ball python. That's right, I actually brought in a scaleless head ball python back years ago. And what happened was I had a shipment coming out of West Africa, and at the last minute, this guy sends me a picture of this ball python that's missing a few scales on its head. Said, hey, do you want it? I was like, I don't know, and to be honest with you, it's probably something I would have passed on if I didn't already have a shipment coming anyway. So I figured, hey, I'd roll the dice. A couple years later, I was able to breed that male to some normal females, and to my surprise, about half the babies came out missing scaleless heads. Now, from that point on, I was convinced that I was going to produce an all scaleless ball python. A few years later, you guys may remember what happened right now. Here one of them is right here. Take a look at that beauty. Just an amazing animal. Now these guys are 2 weeks old already, so they both shed and fed the very first time. So they're incredibly hardy animals. I know there's some concerns out there about a few things, and I want to go ahead and touch on them right now. First off, when they do shed, they shed completely fine in one piece, just like a normal snake, just minus the scale. And yes, they do have eye caps, so they still have the skin over the eyes to protect them. So the scaleless ball python was a success and a tragedy. First off, I took so much abuse about that scaleless animal, you guys know Mr. Smooth, that I eventually stopped posting 100%. Every time I would post, there'd be so much vitriol about it, I decided I'm done. I can't even deal with it anymore. And I knew eventually that all the rumors about them being unhealthy would eventually be disproved as people started producing more and more of them. The good news is since there's been a couple people that have produced scaleless ball pythons, including Mike Wilbanks at Constrictors Unlimited, and I think it's absolutely awesome now that people are seeing that Mr. Smooth was a healthy animal and that is a viable offspring and that they're going to be amazing. In years to come, there's going to be scaleless mutations of all sorts out there, and they're going to be truly awesome. And hey, I'm still in the game. There's no doubt that next year I have a great shot to produce another Mr. Smooth and even more, so I'm not quitting on it, that's for darn sure, and I've got a lot of stuff that's looking really good. My point of this whole show has been the fact that there's some insane value to some of these snakes and have been over the years, but I continue to try to preach to you guys about that it's not about the money. Never put the money before the snakes. But hey, if people are willing to spend a lot of money, there's nothing wrong with selling them for a lot of money. For guys like me, all it does is facilitate the opportunity to do the things that I love, which is working with other animals. And for you guys that are watching this video that had no idea that snakes were worth this kind of value, I hope that I've opened your eyes to these amazing animals and this subculture of people that are willing to pay more for a house. As a matter of fact, Mr. Smooth I was offered $150,000 for it, and I turned it down. 150 grand, and I turned it down. So you guys get the idea. And as always, guys, I'm Facebooking and tweeting my way through life. You guys will see some expensive animals on those platforms. So make sure to follow me over at SnakeBytesTV and on Instagram at SnakeBytes.tv. Until next week, you've been watching Snake Bites.